report on SB 901 pertaining to wildfire response and prevention. We all sadly remember the wildfire catastrophe that struck my district and the districts of several of our colleagues last year. We remember nearly 7,000 families lost homes and all their possessions. We remember 44 people died. And we remember what happened in October 2017 in the North Bay, repeated itself in Southern California within 2 months, and this year's wildfires show that it's a continuing problem. We know it's certain to happen again if this legislature, electric utilities, local governments, landowners, first responders, and others don't come together and take action right now. From the start of this year, my highest priority was and remains responding to past wildfires and preventing future tragedies. My goals were simple: to stand up for the fire victims, those who lost everything, to have them recover all they are entitled to for the damage that they suffered, to protect our fellow Californians from facing new wildfire destruction, and to hold electric utilities accountable and protect the long-term interest of ratepayers throughout California. SB 901 is a comprehensive approach that attacks the problem on multiple levels. First, SB 901 responds to climate change by improving our forests and wildlands management. SB 901 does this by streamlining forest practice regulations and reducing restrictions to encourage and expedite removal of dead and dying trees and chaparral, creating incentives for landowners to fire treat their property, reducing CEQA requirements for timber harvesting when there is an assessment already done under NEPA, requiring conservation easements for timberland to include long-term fuel reduction commitments, updating regulations for fuel breaks and green belts near communities for more fire protection, and requiring CAL FIRE to create the Wildfire Resiliency Program, among other things. SB 901 commits real financial resources to the fuel reduction effort by requiring the legislature to appropriate $200 million in greenhouse gas reduction funds to CAL FIRE annually for the next 5 years. That's $1 billion for healthy forest and fire prevention programs throughout the state of California. SB 901 also addresses the critical issue of disposing of wood waste cleared from forest by extending contracts for biomass generators in many areas of the state for up to 5 more years beyond the current year's contract, a total of 10 years. Second, SB 901 will make operation of the electrical grid safer and more resilient with new regs that increase vegetation removal, de-energizing of power lines and deactivating reclosures during windstorms, modernizing grid infrastructure, and maintaining an adequately sized workforce to respond to emergencies, among other safety and resiliency actions. The bill requires the CPUC to perform risk assessments to ensure that each proposed safety measure returns the biggest benefit for the ratepayer dollar when considering a plan approval. The bill requires independent evaluation of utility compliance with mitigation plans and doubles the amount of fines that can be levied upon a utility for failure to comply. And by the way, the bill prohibits fines and penalties from utilities from being tacked on to rates, as well as any executive compensation. These costs will all be borne by the shareholders moving forward. And third, we must protect and provide ratepayers protection. Members, this must be, and it absolutely is, the most misunderstood part of SB 901. The CPUC has always been authorized to allow a utility recover rates costs and expenses that are deemed just and reasonable. For utility-related wildfire costs going forward, SB 901 enhances the review criteria the CPUC must use to determine what is just and reasonable when determining rate recovery. For utility-related wildfire costs attributable to fires in 2017, the CPUC will use a stress test, a forensic audit, if you will, to extract the maximum amount possible from the utility investors. And the CPUC will require the utility to absorb all those costs up to the point of insolvency. In both instances, 2017 and future fires, SB 901 allows the utilities to use a ratepayer protection bond to finance debt for the purpose of minimizing or leveling ratepayer impacts. Members, let me make one thing clear. If we do not provide a debt stabilizing mechanism for the utility, in this case PG&E, the corporation will certainly face higher borrowing costs, which will translate into significantly higher rates. Or this company may very well face bankruptcy. But what does bankruptcy mean? It means that so many of our constituents who are uninsured or underinsured will likely not recover from wildfire devastation. And quite frankly, colleagues, we just cannot allow that to happen. Bankruptcy means a spike in utility rates as corporate restructuring takes place, and the costs of that restructuring are passed along to the ratepayers by a court, not the CPUC. It means that the capital needed to maintain reliable electrical service will be hard and expensive to come by, and the electric system integrity, safety, and reliability will be at risk. Finally, it means billions of dollars in renewable energy contracts are lost, and our policy to achieve all renewable power renewable power supply and reduce GHG emissions will suffer a severe setback, not to mention a loss of tens of thousands of jobs in California. Without action, ratepayers will be left holding the bag and communities will needlessly suffer. SB 901 is necessary to protect our communities from monstrous wildfires in the future and the loss of property and even the loss of life. Necessary to enhance the safety and reliability and resilience of our electric system. Necessary to reduce regulatory burdens on landowners so they can take the initiative to reduce material on their property that fuels wildfires. Necessary to hold utilities accountable when they fail to operate and manage the electric system to the highest standards of safety. Necessary to minimize ratepayer impacts which are certain to result in a utility's financial downgrade or collapse. We have done everything we could to protect victims and ratepayers in this package. SB 901 has broad support from local government, first responders, labor, insurers, environmental organizations, and many, many more. In conclusion, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the many people who helped make SB 901 a reality. First, I want to thank my fellow conferees and their staffs of Senator Stone, Senator Cannella, Senator Jackson, and Senator Waso, who sat through 7 hearings totaling nearly 20 hours and taking the time to understand some very complex subject matters. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Senator Hertzberg, who's helped me negotiate some of these points in the other House. I want to thank Pro Tem Atkins and her incredible staff for putting in so much time and expertise. They were absolutely incredible, and we could not have done this without them. I also want to thank the conferees in the other House. And lastly, I want to express my appreciation to Governor Brown and his staff that worked very, very hard with us every step of the way. Members, I ask for your aye vote on SB 901 the Conference Committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dodd. Senator Nielsen.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I fervently request and I vote. And this is about both the past and the future of California. As to the past, these cataclysmic fires that have been consuming life and property, acres and acres of land, thousands of acres of land. It's nothing that happened in the last few years. It's devolved, my term, over some 40 years of neglect of managing the forest and the wildlands of this state, whereby then vast quantities, tons and tons of habitat, of fuel has grown up to the degree that it didn't even help the fish and the wildlife, and has resulted directly in the magnitude of these fires that we suffer and the pollution that is brought into the air. Most of the Sacramento Valley has been not fogged in as it is in the wintertime, but smoked in throughout the summer. Many communities have been burned out. I suffered with my colleague from Healdsburg, who represents Lake County, which I have represented. That poor county has suffered enduring damage, not just from the fires, but that recreation has been such a part of the future and the past of Lake County. That's gone. I watched 3 years ago a city in Siskiyou County almost totally burned down. The fire chief's own home burned down. And in the Carr fire to the north of here, just outside of Redding, the very foot of the Shasta Dam, is a small little village. I don't think you could call it even a town, but it's called Keswick. And every time I went up there to Redding to meet with the fire officials and survey the damage, I went up and overlooked Keswick. Happy homes, but a few families, but was all they had. And it's gone. Why did that fire get so out of control? Because decades of neglect, willful, knowing neglect of cleaning up our fires, our forests, and our wildlands, resulted in that accumulation of fuel that has gotten out of control, and then has now given us a new phenomenon, fire tornadoes. And I've seen the product of that. Cars literally exploded, and a man thrown some 60, 70 feet from his car. Of course, he did not survive. This is about fuel reduction and management in the forest and the wildlands. And that does include biomass. It used to be very preferred in California, till we got so obsessed with solar and aeolian energy, wind, that that's all we talked about. Biomass still has its place and is an effective and probably the most effective tool in removing some of this accumulated fuel. Now, we can act now, unfortunately on the heels of yet another cataclysmic fire, or we can wait. And now it is not just rural California that's come to be visited by these fires. Our urban areas now have suffered, as the fires have now invaded some very populated areas at a very high cost of life and property, and of the future for the generations. Some of these families burned out will not be able to go back and rebuild where they lost all their life and their property. For many reasons, not. But that's not good for the future. That is not good for the generations. We need to live in harmony. Now, this is not either about propping up utilities. Utilities are important in California. Some, in many cases, one that's often criticized, PG&E, as you criticize them, think about all the PG&E reservoirs throughout our forests and what those have done to fish and wildlife and habitat. And as far as the ratepayer impact, this bill is not what I would call a godsend or a gift to any utility. In fact, it's probably one of the toughest disciplines that ever has been exerted on utilities. They can live with it, I expect. There'll be a new dynamic. But we cannot accept that the new normal includes cataclysmic fires in the forest and our wild lands and that invade our cities. This is a critical moment where we can turn around decades of failed policies that have gotten us into this mess, that now has so exacerbated that now so many more Californians, at such a great cost, has now changed the dynamic. And we sort of rebuild from here? Yes, we do. But we've got to go forward. We cannot go back. And this legislation that my distinguished colleague from Napa is carrying is a big part of that pathway. I urge and I vote.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. Before we get to our next speaker, Senator Hill, members, if you are on banking and finance, they are meeting in 3191. Please make sure you head over there. Senator Hill.
President, I stand in opposition to this bill, SB 901. I want to start by thanking the conference committee, though, and the members for the countless hours of work they've spent on this, and certainly to their chair for his good work and commitment to what is, I believe, what he feels is the best for California. But what saddens me about this issue is that it could have been prevented. During one of the hearings of the conference committee, San Diego Gas and Electric explained how they improved their safety infrastructure after the 2007 wildfires. Since then, their power lines haven't started any fires. PG&E could have made these same safety improvements, deactivating reclosures as a preventative measure during high wind events, de-energizing lines during severe weather events, installing weather sensors to better manage their system, doing a better job of removing trees and cutting branches near power lines. Instead, they focused on shareholder profits over safety. I don't want to dwell on the past and relive San Bruno. I think most of you are tired of hearing me say it, and I'm frankly tired of saying it. But it does give us a lesson. It's important to remind people that PG&E is a convicted felon. From 1996 to 2010, PG&E made $400 million more than their authorized rate of return on equity because they cut spending on gas safety, leading up to the explosion that killed 8 people in my district. And they diverted that $400 million to profit and bonuses and incentives for executives. In fact, after that and after the explosion, the CEO left PG&E with a $28 million golden parachute. Now their negligence is killing constituents in other members' districts. CAL FIRE reports show that PG&E violated state law in 11 of the 16 fires last October. So knowing all of this, shouldn't we focus on requiring PG&E to improve the safety of their electric system that they've been neglecting all these years? Instead, this bill rewards their bad behavior. Under current law, if a utility's lines start a fire, but they didn't do anything wrong, They can pass the cost on to their ratepayers. But if the utility's negligence causes the fire, their shareholders must pay. This bill allows PG&E to pass costs on to ratepayers even if they were negligent. This is a huge change, members. We're allowing utilities that were negligent and started fires last year to charge ratepayers for the financing. Shareholders are the ones who are supposed to pay for the liability financing when a utility is negligent. We don't even have all of the CAL FIRE reports back. We don't even know how bad PG&E was mismanaging their system. We don't know their total liabilities from last year's fires, yet we're allowing them to charge the victims' families to bail them out of their negligent behavior. Why are we rushing to bail out PG&E with its history of cutting safety as a business decision? Did taxpayers bail out BP after the Gulf oil spill? No. They were forced to pay $50 billion in liabilities and fines. They spread the cost over time and are continuing to operate. So what else could the conference committee have done? Why didn't we look at securitizing a portion of PG&E's profit for a number of years out, instead of placing the company's neglect squarely on the ratepayer? We could have eased the burden on shareholders by allowing them to pay off the liability over time instead of offering up the ratepayers' money. Why didn't we demand the PUC to lower the rate of return for PG&E until the liability was paid? How could we possibly agree to bailing out PG&E and not even mention changing that guaranteed profit? So there are a number of choices we had, members, and we didn't take those. The tragedy of our response is that it's focused more on Wall Street profits and utility shareholders instead of what's right for Californians. The existing legal structure in California protects ratepayers and holds utilities accountable. That's exactly why PG&E is trying to change the rules. Ratepayers pay their bills every month, expecting the utility to properly manage their system. The ratepayers did not make these business decisions. The ratepayers did not mismanage their assets. CAL FIRE has said that PG&E violated this state law in 11 of the 16 fires last year for not properly removing and cutting back trees, as well as other violations. But under this bill, the ratepayers will be paying for a company's neglect. Let's not feel rushed or pressured into voting for something we know is wrong. Let's wait until all the CAL FIRE reports are released so we have the information we need before casting a vote. Let's wait until we know what PG&E's actual liabilities are. I respectfully ask for your no vote on SB 901.
Thank you, Senator Hill. Members, I do apologize. Banking and Finance is not meeting in 3191, so if you made your way over there, come on and make your way back. We're going to go to Senator Gaines.
Thank you, Madam President and members. I've seen things this year that I hoped I would never see in my life. The Carr Fire ripped through my district, turning it into a charred, blackened wasteland, leaving destruction in its path, reducing family homes to piles of ash. I met with families at shelters who had nothing, no homes, no clothing, no cars, no money, wondering how they were going to start over, how they were going to get their kids to school, where they were going to stay after the shelters closed their doors. My constituent, Don Smith, lost his life while trying to cut fire breaks in his tractor to save the lives and property of people he had never met. He was a hero. I went to the funeral of yet another firefighter and saw the tears streaming down the faces of his friends and family as they mourned his death. I'm not the only member who has seen his constituents suffer like this in the past few years. Many of us know the anguish these fires bring with them and how families and businesses pay the price for years after the flames die out. Above and beyond all that, I've seen the usual barrage of climate bills come through the legislature this year, maybe more than ever. And I have heard many of my colleagues talk about climate change and fires going hand in hand and how this is the new normal. I hope that the human tragedy and theoretical climate and fire connection together would catalyze this body to be as bold in forest management as it has been in other important areas. But Senate Bill 901 is not a bold bill. It's not a crisis bill. It's not a bill that tells taxpayers that we are serious about solving the wildfire plague that's sweeping across our state. I'm glad it's easing up on timber harvest plans and small landowners, but why stop there if this really is the new normal? I'm glad it's helping us cut short roads in the logging areas, but why stop there if this really is the new normal? If the new normal is piles of ash and funerals, then why isn't this bill massive and groundbreaking? Why doesn't it smash the model that's put so many in danger? Why doesn't it abolish forever the barriers that keep us at risk? Why sunset efforts to keep us safe? Why would we allow nonprofits and public agencies to sell the timber for fire breaks, but not for-profit entities? Is a fire break less effective if somebody makes a profit from it? Do you think the people burned out of their homes in the Carr Fire or in Santa Rosa cared if someone made a profit from a fire break? We need all hands on deck here. If we're really fighting a war against the fires that have devastated our forests and communities, we need every ally we can get, public, private, local, state, and federal. $200 million a year in forest management treatment is a baby step. I'm thankful for it, but it's not nearly enough. We have millions of acres that need treatment now. We have a tree mortality crisis with more than 100 million dead trees. We have years of drought and decades of forest mismanagement to overcome. We need to go to the general fund to dedicate billions to grooming our forests immediately. We need to hire every spare chainsaw in the country, every tractor and truck, to get our forests ready for the so-called new normal. Because if this new normal is what we've had the past 2 years, I'm not accepting it. I'm not accepting that a state with billions in surplus can only put 200 million more a year into forest management. I'm not accepting that a body that swears this is the new normal cuts off forest thinning efforts after 5 years. This bill makes it sound like the new normal is this body failing to rise to the challenge of the pressing issues of the day and banning plastic straws instead. The legislature demands so much from the people of California. This body just put an enormous gas tax on their backs. It forces them to pay the highest sales and income taxes in the nation. Its climate change policies make our residential electricity rates 60% higher than the national average. The legislature takes and takes and takes. It's relentless. Our fire crisis and this conference committee was a chance to show the people that the endless money grabs are not all in vain, and that we can step up to provide the fundamental public safety services and that the minimum responsibility of a government. Instead, we give them a little Band-Aid to place over a life-threatening wound. I cannot support a bill that falls so short of what we owe to our citizens. I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gaines. Senator Hertzberg.
Briefly, thank you, Madam President. You know, I just want to also join in to thank Senator Dodd and the PT and her staff for the around-the-clock work that I was able to witness and the dedication in trying to pull together. It's a very difficult circumstance. And I just briefly want to make a point as the Chair of Natural Resources and Water and to acknowledge the work of Mr. Craven and Mr. O'Connor and Mr. Lipper dealing with the forestry element of this. And certainly this was a time where there was a coalition of folks, an unusual sweet spot, if you will, where there was just an unbelievable amount of work, and certainly in the eyes of a lot, including myself, that this was the biggest forestry reform in California in 20 years. Again, thank you, and I ask for your support of this important measure.
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg. Senator Morlock.
Thank you, Madam President. SB 901 was a bill that piqued my interest early in the season, early this year. I liked it so much, I went to the Senator of Napa and asked if I could be a co-author. I was working on a similar bill that was also focused on this topic. And it was devoted to modifying the California Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006 relating to the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It was Senate Bill 1463 because wildfires create tremendous amounts of greenhouse gases. Assembly Bill 32 back in '06 does not address greenhouse gases generated by wildfires. It's a gaping hole in California's wanting to address climate change. Therefore, to be holistic in Sacramento's approach to this concern, SB 1463 required the use of cap-and-trade revenues to harden electronic transmission lines, a cause of many of California's tragic wildfires, and other proactive, preventative initiatives to reduce this fire epidemic. Regretfully, this bill was killed in the Senate Environmental Quality Committee on April 18th, but gratefully, SB 901 includes the concept of directing cap-and-trade revenues to CAL FIRE for fire prevention programs to reduce greenhouse gases. Bravo. I encourage and I vote on SB 901. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Morlock. Senator McGuire.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I've shortened my words tonight, and I just want to start out by saying thank you. Thank you to Senator Dodd and the conferees and the pro tem, the members of the Assembly, especially Assemblymember Wood. Senator Dodd has had near an impossible task of trying to be able to strike a balance, and he deserves incredible credit tonight. It is not easy to balance responsibility versus culpability, blame versus guilt, fairness versus justice, and the wrong thing versus the right thing. But the bill in front of us does a lot of the right thing. First of all, it takes inverse condemnation off the table. If inverse condemnation was in this bill, I would not be standing in support today. It takes the all-important fire pre-positioning seriously. There is no doubt that pre-positioning will save lives in every corner of this state. Fuel reduction, this is critical. New forestry practices that will help clear forestry fuels and $1 billion over the next 5 years to improve forest health and focus on fire prevention. The bill forces utilities to take wildfire prevention seriously, and it's about damn time. And by themselves, these provisions would make supporting this bill easy. But as Senator Dodd has been tackling, there are provisions that make it harder. And they say a good compromise makes everyone a bit unhappy. And that's me tonight. I do have concerns about what we're doing for utilities, especially ones that are negligent for any reason. I have concerns about the language in this proposal that could use ratepayer money. But I also understand the importance of having reliable and safe utility service. And hopefully, if this bill passes, we'll be able to further direct the California Public Utilities Commission on exactly what is fair and not fair. As I said from the beginning, this is an incredibly difficult decision, I know, for all of us. But I've come to the conclusion on balance that this bill does right is more than it does wrong, but it was not an easy decision. And again, Senator Dodd, I want to take a moment and say thank you for all of your work.
Thank you, Senator McGuire. Senator Jackson.
Madam President, having served on the conference committee, I feel it's important to just add me too, if you will, to the comments made by my good colleague from the North Coast, and to also thank Senator Dodd from the Napa area for an excruciating experience that I know he went through, but the hard work that went into this. This is not perfect. There is no perfect solution to this. We are in an era of climate change. We know how it happened. We know that the powers that be are still ignoring the fact that our behavior has created a hardening of this planet, a warming of this planet, and we are experiencing the impacts of that. So we're angry. And we have every right to be angry. And we're angry that our major utility company has not taken this particularly seriously and has been found to be negligent over and over and over again. So the question is, what do we do about that? And I would like to say that this bill, I believe, attacks the problem in the most constructive and positive way possible under these circumstances. As was mentioned, there's no change to the inverse condemnation law. It doesn't matter if the utilities are negligent. If their equipment is responsible for a fire, they're going to pay. And that notion of changing that was taken off the table early. And I think that was critical. We need to remember that. But the question is, what are we going to do now going forward? And many of us on this committee said the two most important things that we could do were to try to deal with prevention and safety. And the goal was to protect the victim and the ratepayer. And so this measure is a balancing. We also need that energy. If we didn't need it, boy, I'd be the first to push PG&E off the cliff. But we need their energy, and if we push them off the cliff, it's going to cost the ratepayer more. So here we have a balancing. The first dollars are going to come from the shareholders, and we're going to scrub, is the word that the good senator from Napa likes to use. Every dime of their massive profits is going to come out of this to pay for the costs associated with these fires. And after that, we're going to try to make the impacts of what it's going to take to keep these utilities going as minimal as possible. We're not going to let these PG&E executives make money and get bonuses at the cost of the ratepayer. It's going to come out of the shareholder. If the shareholders want to give them, reward them for their behavior, it's not going to be on the ratepayer. This is a balanced measure. It's not perfect, but it will keep us going forward. It will provide the kind of environmental protections we need, the kind of fire prevention protections we need. And with that, I would urge your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Senator Dodd, would you like to close?
Madam President, members, I appreciate the rigorous debate tonight. I think you've heard all the reasons why we ought to pass SB 901, this conference committee report. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Dodd. Members, before I ask the Secretary to call the roll, I'd like to invite all members back to the floor. After this vote, we are going to lift calls. Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Allen. Aye. Anderson. Atkins. Aye. Anderson, aye. Bates. Bell. Aye. Berryhill. Bradford. Aye. Cannella. Aye. Chang. De Leon. Aye. Delgado. Aye. Dodd. Aye. Fuller. Gaines. No. Galgiani. Aye. Glazer. Aye. Hernandez. Aye. Hertzberg. Aye. Hill. No. Hueso. Aye. Jackson. Aye. Lara. Aye. Leva. Aye. McGuire. Aye. Mitchell. Aye. Monning. Aye. Morlock. Aye. Morrell. Wynn. Nilsson. Aye. Pan. Aye. Portantino. Aye. Roth. Aye. Skinner. Aye. Stern. Aye. Stone. Vidak. No. Wachowski. Aye. Wiener. Aye. Wilk.
Please call the absent members.
Bates. Berryhill. Chang. Fuller. Morrell. Wynn. Stone. Wilk. Wilk, no.
Ayes 29, noes 4. Conference report is adopted. Colleagues, we have 24 items left, and what we're going